Hi, folks. Welcome to the 2021 Pathway to Success training. We're happy that you're able to join us. We've got three speakers today that we're really excited about. Let me walk you through a little bit of what we're up to this morning. We'll start off. I'm Wes Blake. I'm a program consultant here at KDE, and I'm walking you through the intro here. From 9:05 to 10, we've got our keynote, Duane Betts, and then we'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll have session 2 from 10:05 to 10:50, and Thelma Hawkins is with us again. From 10:50 to 11, we'll have a 10-minute break, and from 11 to 11:45, we'll have Jamie Nebbet working with us. And then from 11:45 to noon, we'll have Monica Higgins walking us through the closing. And a little bit about our presenters. I'll go ahead and introduce all three of our presenters, and we're really excited for the folks we've got working with us today. Reginald Duane Betts, he often gives talks about his experiences, detailing his trek from incarceration to Yale Law School and the role that grit, perseverance, and literature played in his success. Between his work in public defense, his years of advocacy, and his own experiences as a teenager in a maximum security prison, all this uniquely positions him to speak to the failures of the current criminal justice system and to present encouraging ideas for change. Betts was appointed to the Coordinating Council of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention by President Barack Obama. He was named a 2018 Guggenheim Fellow and a 2018 NEA Fellow. His poetry has long been praised. His writing has generated national attention, earned him a Soros Justice Fellowship, a Radcliffe Fellowship, a Ruth Lilly Fellowship, an NAACP Image Award, and a New America Fellowship. Betts created Freedom Reads also, which harnesses the power of literature to counter what prison does to the spirit. And then secondly, we're really excited to have Thelma Hawkins helping us out again and offering her expertise. Most of us know Thelma. If you don't, she's with us again today, and she's gonna talk with us about budgeting and finance. Thelma is the branch manager in the Office of Finance and Operations at KDE. She's a valued resource. She's a frequent collaborator of our Title I Part D program, and we're really excited to have her with us today. And Jamie Nebbet is the first time she's helping us out. We're excited to have Jamie with us this morning. Jamie is an accomplished higher education professional who is committed to the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. As a trained facilitator and DEI leader, Nebbet provides strategic leadership to higher education institutions and organizations. She assists leaders in developing culturally responsive programs and services designed to eliminate structural, institutional, and systemic barriers. Nebbet has assisted higher education institutions with cultural competency trainings, development of annual DEI plans, organization and implementation of campus-wide recognition programs, while creating organizational-wide cultural change. And just a little bit about Teams Live event that you're looking at here. The main thing, first of all, you want to know how to control the volume, and you look in the bottom left corner, that's your volume control there. And secondly, for closed captioning, either to turn it on or off, that's in your bottom right corner here. And to set up your speakers, that's the bottom right corner, number 3 here. If you want to go to full screen, you can use that bottom right corner button. Just know that you'll need to hit escape to return to a view where you can view the Q&A. And lastly, any questions that you have, upper right corner, this is your Q&A button. You can pose questions to our speakers, and Monica Higgins is gracious enough to monitor that for us today. And folks, without further ado, we're really excited to have Duane with us today. And Duane, I am going to turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. This is in some ways.
Duane, I'm about to send your video live. Apologies. I'm doing it slowly. And did you want to share your content to begin with, Duane?
Yeah, I'm gonna share it in a second. I'm just gonna
Okay.
talk to it, then I'll open it up.
All right, Duane, you have it officially now. It's yours. Thank you.
This is strange because I just got a phone call from a prison, and I got a standing rule that I have to accept calls from prison. So I'm just gonna tell him that I can't talk. And it's interesting for this though, because one of the things press. I didn't set this up on purpose, but one of the challenges with incarceration and with this conversation is like, what do you owe people? And particularly like, what do you owe strangers? You know, as educators, a lot of the people you work with, you don't actually know. Hey, Terrell, man, I'm presenting to actually a group of educators who work in the Department of Corrections, and so I can't really talk, but I just wanted to let you know because I wanted to answer the phone. Hit me back later, all right? Or unless you want to stay on hold and you can just hear what I'm saying. All right, bet. So I'm just gonna leave the phone right here, and you can just listen to me talk my foolishness. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen, but just to be clear, you know, I think fundamentally one of the questions that we ask ourselves as educators is, what do we owe the people who we're charged with educating? And it is all right, perfect. It's a really challenging question. And I'll start by asking first a different question. In fact, actually, I just made a mistake because I'm sort of discombobulated with that phone call. All right, let me see. Let me start over. All right. What do you think about when you hear the word prison? A lot of people, they'll say they think about violence. If you work in prison, you say you think about what it means to go to the jail, go to the detention center, and to give up all of your stuff and to go inside of this place where you hope to educate somebody. But me, when I think about prison, when I think about jail, when I think about the juvenile detention center, the places that I've done time at, I think about books. See, when I was locked up, there was no way for you to reach out and grab a book off of a shelf like this. And to really make you understand where I'm coming from, I got to take you to the fall 1997 when my world looked like this. You see, I was in solitary confinement. I was 16 years old. I was at the Fairfax County Jail, and it was the worst kind of hole. It was the hole where the steel door was so thick that you couldn't even shout out of. They would take out mattresses every morning because part of being in the hole meant that you weren't supposed to sleep during the day. And all you had was the silence. I remember I got a letter from somebody I went to high school with. They had just had their senior class trip, or you know, maybe that was a few months before, but that's what he was writing me about. And I was devastated. In fact, it wasn't the senior class trip, it was the junior class trip. And he was writing me about it, and I was devastated because it was like the first time everybody had sort of got to be alone without their parents, you know, in the hotel. And they went to King's Dominion. It was in Virginia. Went down to Virginia from PG County, Maryland. And I remember being devastated because, you know, I was facing life in prison for this carjacking, and my mind couldn't contain. It just couldn't contain what it meant to have a peer experiencing all of the things that he was writing to me about, and me being in a hole. And I remember being so angry that I like balled my fist up and I punched the brick wall like as hard as I could, and I broke my pinky. And I waited a little bit and then yelled for the guards, and they came, and they were afraid that I was gonna hurt myself or something. And I told them that I was just shadow boxing with the wall, and the wall won. And the guard started laughing. He was like, "You funny." And they took me to the nurse, and they set my pinky, and I came back to the cell, and I had this stack of books. It was Mark Twain. It was that book, Sophie's Choice. You know, it was some philosophy. It was Weber, who I still pronounce his name wrong because I read his book when I was 16, and you know, about the Protestant work ethic, and I didn't know that he was German, so I pronounced it Weber. And I had this big stack of books that I got from the GED teacher. And the thing is, when I met her, and when I met her, and she was, I met her because they told me that if I get my GED, I could get time off of my sentence. When I met her, I looked like this. I remember I go to the GED classroom, and I'm the youngest dude there, and I got on a small, the jail garb is this green scrubs, and I got on a small, but it's still way too big for me. And I sit through the whole class and I don't say anything. I sit through the whole class and I don't say anything. And afterwards, I go up to talk to her and I say, "Look, I think I should get my GED." And this is about how I look, except I got on scrubs. And she says, "How old are you?" And she said it as if that she was just couldn't really understand my presence in that classroom. And I was 16 and I told her, and she said, "What classes are you taking in school?" This is the first time I had got to brag the whole time I've been locked up. And so, I think my back straightened out a little bit, and I tell her, I'm in French 4. Actually, and it's crazy that I still remember this. I tell her this way. I say, well, first period, I have physics. Second period, I have chemistry. Third period, I have English. Fourth period, I have French 4. And then fifth period, I got lunch. Sixth period after lunch. I don't believe I still remember this shit. But I tell her sixth period after lunch, I got pre-calculus. I tell her seventh period, it's this thing called it was intro to C++ and discrete math. And then I told her my last class was a computer graphics class. And she paused and looked at me and said, "My son is taking some of those classes." And honestly, this is the first time that I've been locked up that anybody associated me with like their child, with somebody in their community. I mean, this was 1996, and it's the era of the super predator. And so, what people looked at me when they saw a kid, no matter that it was no hair on my face, no matter that I weighed 125 pounds soaking wet, what they saw is a menace, what they saw is a threat. What they saw really was the charges that I faced. And the charges were admittedly serious, and I had already confessed to it. So there was sort of some understanding that I had held a gun and threatened somebody with the gun and took their car and drove away into the night. And I understood all of the violence of the crime, but it was really difficult for me to process the idea that going to the jail meant I could no longer be vulnerable and I could no longer be a child. It meant that the adults around me didn't care about my safety, and they didn't care about my growth, my development, anything. But this lady did. And because she did, when I was sent to the hole for something ridiculous, right? She made it a point to make them give me books. And so I had books in the hole. I had books that I couldn't comprehend at all. But with a broken hand, I turned to those books because I had like nothing else really to turn to. I couldn't write. I couldn't sleep during the day because it just was a concrete slab, and I turned to the books. So I'm facing life in prison, and I'm in this GED course, and she tells me, you should get your high school diploma given the classes that you're taking. And so she finds out, she writes to school to get my transcripts, and she transfers me to a Virginia school. And I finished 11th grade, and I take 12th grade English because it turns out that because I was taking these advanced math courses and science courses, I had enough credits to graduate if I took 11th grade math and I took 12th grade English while finishing my 11th grade courses. And so this is me graduating from high school. You could tell this is like the smallest graduation gown they had, and it was way too big for me, and I am not at all happy. Um, it's funny, I forgot what that kid looked like. I was still facing life in prison, and I had skipped the 12th grade. I always wanted to skip a grade my whole life. Honestly, I was like it was like a marker of success in my head. And so I always wanted to skip a grade anyway, but I didn't think it would happen under these circumstances. And you could look at me, I look like a kid, you know. And if you don't know, you wouldn't recognize that the backdrop of that is the Fairfax County Jail. Um, but it feels like the last place that you would take a graduation photo. And as alone as I felt at that moment, the truth was the person that was with me and who had been with me the whole time, in terms of just like me trying to navigate what it meant to be incarcerated, was my teacher. It's funny because I told her I wanted to be a writer. And it's an absurd kind of goal for a kid that is facing life in prison. But I knew that you could have an ink pen while you were locked up. I just knew that they couldn't take a pen from me. And I didn't know what kind of writer I wanted to be. I didn't know if I wanted to be a novelist. If you would have asked me, my inability to answer the question would have terrified me. And so I just told myself I wanted to be a writer, and I told her. And what she did with that knowledge was buy me any novel that I wanted to read. She made me keep a journal as a part of like my English course. Some people would argue that my English course wasn't sufficient for a high school education because essentially all I did for 11th and 12th grade English was read books and write essays in response to those books. That's all. I mean, I read dozens of books, but that's all I worked on was reading and writing responses. And yet it's that work, you know, when I came home, um, I I came home and I was working in a bookstore, and I started a book club. And I started a book club for kids. And Washington Post wrote about the book club, and it ended up being on the front page of the Washington Post. And this is a long story, but it ended up being on the front page of Washington Post. And after that, somebody asked me to write a book, and I'm working on a book. And the first thing I went back to was an essay that I spent years working on when I was incarcerated. And the essay was called A Question of Freedom. And in that essay, I was trying to reckon with what it meant for me to have been incarcerated at 16, when my friends were experiencing all of the things they experienced, and what kind of person I imagined my time in prison would allow me to be. And so this image here is, and all those are my books on the shelf behind me. Is my James Baldwin, is my Yusef Komunyaka, Cornelius Eady. These are the books that carried me through prison, Crick Crack. Some of these books are still on my bookshelf. But I thought that what this image suggested was what she believed was possible when I was a kid was somehow beginning to come true. Now, the other thing is, you know, I graduated from University of Maryland, and I didn't include that slide. I wanted to include the slide from when I went to when I graduated from Yale. And the reason why I wanted to include the slide from when I graduated from Yale is because the one thing I felt like she taught me was that to have a true sense of what's possible did not mean I had to name the thing that was possible. And to have a true sense of what it meant to pursue excellence did not mean that I had to have a idea about what the destination was. You know, I came out of prison and was completely ill-equipped for academic success in some ways and perfectly equipped in other ways. I didn't know what a semester was. You know, I didn't know what it meant to be the class of anything because I graduated from the county jail and I was a class of one. But what I knew was that if you sort of value what you could find in a book, then you could find somebody else to talk to who would value it in the very same way that you did. And the beautiful thing about this moment here that I'm showing you is that I know that while I was locked up, I could only name, outside of the guys I did time with, I could only name two people that imagined that this was possible. The very first teacher who you know, who made sure I got my high school diploma, and a woman who I worked for when I was at the Augusta Correctional Center. I was a GED instructor there. And she taught me how to type on an old school typewriter. She taught me how to type because I told her I wanted to be a poet and I needed to submit my poems in. And so she taught me how to type. But those were the only two people the entire time I was in prison who deeply had a sense that I could be whatever I wanted to. And the real messed up part is that a lot of times I don't remember their names. I know them and they'll come back to me, but a lot of times I don't remember their names because when they were believing in me, I wasn't fully believing in myself, and so I only understood the risk that they took in having that kind of faith in my future. I only began to understand it in retrospect. And when I wrote my book, I used and this is the worst thing that I sort of I used I didn't use their real names in the books, and so I really don't remember who they are, and so it's kind of frustrating to me. Even though when I came home, I did talk to my teacher from Fairfax a lot. But and in talking to her a lot, one of the things I learned was that it wasn't her job to really be my friend, and that it was awkward in ways that neither one of us could put a grip on. And that she didn't do it because she liked me, although she did like me, but she did it because she felt like it was her obligation and her duty. And then this is the last photo, and I'm gonna say a few more things, and then I'm gonna tell you about Freedom Reads, and I'm gonna open it up for questions. And so this is the last image. This is me, still not smiling, but I'm giving a commencement speech at Quinnipiac University, and I'm using this one for another reason, is because one of the things I've learned in my own story is that um, part of the educators that inspired me was really predicated on them having no real idea what I would be going through life, and just feeling like it was important to instill some sense about the importance of literature, the importance of perseverance, and the importance of trying. I gave the commencement speech at this university, and they gave me an honorary degree. And it's funny because I couldn't even get an interview at a job there. And I thought that fully encapsulated some of the things that you deal with when you spend time in prison, which is that you had this sense of expectation and hope in what you might want to do, and at the same time, you have people who might praise you for some of your accomplishments, and yet not give you the opportunity to work and not give you the opportunity to live in the world in the way they get a chance to live in the world. When I was invited to sort of speak here, I wanted to say, a couple of things. I wanted to tell y'all about my own educational journey and like broad sweeps. I got way more degrees than I should have, and I've been a college student basically since 3 months after my release from prison. But beyond that, beyond talking about my own story, is I wanted to make the case for the fact that the educators in the prison system frequently don't get remembered. The educators, although while I was locked up, I got a much better education than I did when I was in high school. Even though I took, you know, French 4 and I took physics and I took pre-calculus, the difference was that I was just in those classes and I was pretty smart and I was able to get by. But the teachers didn't notice me. And in fact, the teachers worked actively not to notice me because I was getting into things. I was like getting high and I was often belligerent and I was more sarcastic than I had a right to be. And I did all of those things that as a kid makes teachers push you away. And then I carjacked somebody. And the wild thing was that when I got incarcerated and I started trying to get an education in prison, I had already done the thing that fundamentally would give people the right to that for some would give people the right to instinctively push me away. And yet my success today is predicated on the fact that I had two really brilliant, kind and thoughtful, maybe not even brilliant, but really kind and thoughtful and committed educators to making sure that I understood and knew what I wanted to accomplish matters. And so, having said that, I have a lot more to say, but I think I will pause and see if people have responses and questions. And then because I answer questions in a long-winded way, I want to give um, time for that. Hey man, thanks for listening. Yo, Star, the phone about to cut off, man. Thanks for jumping on though. All right, man, take it easy. Actually, I'll tell one more story since he's off the phone now, and I feel like I couldn't tell the story while he was there because it was too I don't know, not too personal, but me and this guy we met when we were 16 years old, And the funny thing about education is you think that it only touches what happens in the classroom. But while, when I started this book club, I started the book club at a bookstore called Caribou in Maryland. But then I was running it in a public school because the teacher reached out to me and said, "Would you bring your book club to my school?" And their school was in Virginia. It was like 30, 40 minutes away from where I lived. But I was like, sure, why not? And one of the interesting things that happened was kids who weren't in the book club would start reading the books, and it created a conversation between them and they were too cool to come to the book club. Even though I was cool and I was brabbing them with pizza, they would say, "We're not doing this book club thing." But the teachers would tell me that they would see them talking about the books. So one of the things about me and Terrell was that, you know, because people invested a lot in my education, me and him became close, and we would walk the yard together. And he's talking about 16 years old, 17 years old at one of the, worst prisons at the time in Virginia. And and I don't know, we've been close for a minute. And anyway, recently I started when I went to law school. I didn't know why I went to law school, and this might not be related, but I'm gonna tell you because he was on the phone. Um, I actually didn't know why I went to law school, or like if you asked me at the time, I would say I went to law school because I couldn't get a job. I had a couple of college degrees, and I was applying for jobs, and I was constantly having a door slammed in my face, the proverbial door. And I would have people tell me straight up that the reason why we're not hiring you is because of your criminal record. And so I decided to go to law school. And when I filled out my application, when I filled out my personal statement, I wrote it. I said I was going to law school. I imagined I was going to be a public defender, and part of that was, I don't know. I thought it was important to keep people out of prison. But then I realized, while I was in law school, I started representing people on parole, and I started trying to get attorneys for friends of mine. And I realized that I went to law school not to keep people out of prison, but to try to get people out of prison who I knew had been there for enough time. And so, I had a chance to represent him actually. And he did 24 years right now. And like last week, the week before last, I did his parole packet. His parole packet was like 75, 80 pages, and it had letters from like everybody, from people in the Department of Corrections, from guidance counselors, from educators. And anyway, a couple weeks ago we found out he made parole. And so now, at first when he would call me, it would be a lot of tense. It would just be tense almost and sad because not knowing when he would be released. But we just found out he made parole, so that's good news. So I'll give you guys that news, and now um, I'll open up for questions and also say that I know it's for me. It always feels awkward if somebody calls me and I answer the phone. I've actually only done this twice. Um, but what I appreciate about it is that in prison, you can't experience something like this, even though we have, I've gone to 20 universities even during COVID. I've done speaking engagements at 20 places even during COVID. Even if it's only been on Zoom or Google Meet or Teams, I've been able to do it. But he hasn't been able to get a visit for like the past 18 months, and he hasn't been able to go to class for the past 18 months. And they usually have a like a reentry program that they put people through when they make parole. He won't be able to do that either. So I like to think he appreciated being able to be on this call because for a second he got to see me as in a professional world. So I thank you guys for not jumping in the chat saying how horrible that was that I did that. And now let's open it up for questions.
Currently, right now, we don't have any questions coming in, Duane, but I will definitely keep an eye on that. Are there any questions?
I'll give it 2 seconds and then I'll just keep talking. I know it's like a 10-second delay, so I'll just give it 10 seconds and take a sip of coffee, and then I'll keep talking.
There is not anything coming in the chat right now.
All right, cool. So I actually taught I taught at this prison called the Cheshire Correctional Institute here in Connecticut. It's a part of a prison education program that's run by Wesleyan University, and one of the devastating things about teaching in the program was because I went to prison when I was very young, and when you go to prison when you're young, I think the people you notice most who are the people who are really young. And I've been invited to this class to speak. It was a philosophy course that a friend of mine ran, so I've been invited to this course, really to just be there and witness. And then I got invited, excuse me, and then I got invited to co-teach a class on philosophy and writing. One of my struggles while visiting really weekly was that I was seeing the older versions of myself. I was seeing people who had gotten locked up when they was 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and had done 10 and 15 years. But I went there weekly, and it was a couple things that happened that I think was radical. The students, they started this program in maybe 2009, and they were able to take courses piecemeal, so to be a course a semester. Some semesters they might get a chance to take 2 courses. Sometimes they would take a course in the summer, and it was all dependent on what kind of staff was available. And so ultimately, I was working in this program in 2016, 17, and 18. And this is at Wesleyan University. And so Wesleyan invited me to get a commencement speech this year. And one of the things that was really radical about that moment of me giving a commencement speech was that as I was preparing for the speech, I learned that it was 8 students from the Wesleyan Prison Education Program who were graduating, including one guy who I knew who had came home. He got released from prison the day before the graduation. Um, and I remember giving a speech, and my friend who teaches in a program, she watched the speech online with her students. I remember the other thing that I just found, important is that they had started getting their education. They had started taking these college courses in 2009 when Wesleyan didn't have a degree granting program. They were just given an opportunity of people to just take classes. It was education for education's sake. And then you fast forward uh, roughly 12 years, and now all of a sudden, I'm seeing one of them walk across the stage and getting a diploma. And that was really radical. And I think one of the reasons I bring that up is it echoes something else that I was thinking about my own experience. Um, and that something else is just the idea that people invest in education because they believe in the possibilities, but a lot of that comes from the teachers and the educators that they work with, and it's not necessarily something that they have before they embark on that journey. I see you jump back on the screen.
Yes. Duane, we have several questions coming in, and there is a question from Sarah. So what is your best advice for young men in a similar position?
My best advice, honestly, is not to get in a situation where people have to ask them questions and then they go through like 40 seconds thinking that nobody has questions for them. It's so frightening. No, that's not my best advice. You know what? I was listening to this podcast. So now I was listening to a podcast. Now, I actually mostly read fiction. And I do think that I'll tell you how I read Sophie's Choice, but I mostly read fiction, and I'm talking about it was up and down. The first book I read cover to cover was Ernest Gaines' A Lesson Before Dying. Now, Gaines is considered like literary fiction, but really Gaines is an old school storyteller. And then I read other books. I remember reading like Shibumi. I remember reading things like The White Knight, and then I remember getting into Donald Goins. I read a lot of Walter Mosley, and then only later did I get into Faulkner, did I get into Toni Morrison, did I get into Jamaica Kincaid, Edwidge Donnycat, Easter Eaton, Steinbeck, all of these different writers. I read a lot of J. California Cooper, which I think is not considered literary fiction necessarily, but is. And this is just somebody who was writing. That's how I learned about Reconstruction. I learned from Wake of the Wind. I learned what Black folks went through just post incarceration, right? I read, a lot of mystery books. And I say all of this to say that my education was fundamentally founded upon the book and upon reading. And it was only later when I was a bit old, I was still locked up, but I did time in a hole where you read what came into your cell. And so that's how I started reading fantasy, right? That's how I started reading Lord of the Rings, but that's also how I started reading like more lowbrow fantasy. And so one piece of advice I would give anybody is when we think about education, I've walked into prisons and they say, you don't sound like somebody that's incarcerated. One piece of advice is one is no way that somebody incarcerated sounds, right? But one piece of advice I would say is that reading fundamentally, right, is a practice that conditions you to understand the world better. Somebody recently said that it's only through books that like for the aspect, it's talking about war, but it says for the aspect of war that is madness. Only exposure to liberal arts is going to bring a person into contact with what do you do when the world around you is unintelligible chaos. And prison is like a war, right? And so I would tell them that piece of advice that really is only through literature that you come close, that you come in contact with something that suggests what you should do when the world is unintelligible chaos. And the beauty of that, right, is that if you believe that, then you prepare yourself for a world outside of prison. That's one thing. And the second thing I would say is it all starts with some fundamental belief in what's possible, even if you can't name that thing. When I said that I would be a writer, I had no idea what it meant to be a writer. And yet, I published 4 books. And I think it's not because I was more talented than anybody else. It's because fundamentally I committed to something without having any real hope that it would happen.
All right. Thank you so much, Duane. We also have several other questions coming in the chat. So the next particular question is, what are a couple of book titles that you highly recommend for youth in detention centers?
Yeah, so I'm gonna give 2 answers to that, right? So, and the first answer is, actually, I'm gonna tell the story about how I read Sophie's Choice. Now, if you read Sophie's Choice, you know that this is the last book you give a 16-year-old. A 16-year-old facing life in prison. I don't know if you, so let's just assume you haven't read Sophie's Choice. Sophie's Choice is about a young woman who went to the camps, to Auschwitz, or one of the camps, and she had 2 children. And they take her through the camps, and they say, pick one. And you don't learn this at the beginning of the book, but you learn this as you read the book. And it is fucking devastating. And if you're thinking about a book that you give a 16-year-old facing life in prison, that is not the book, right? That's just not it. But the book, I was looking for a book called Sophie's World, which is a book about philosophy. And I asked the teacher, I was like, can you give me Sophie's World? I always was interested in philosophy and I love to read it. I couldn't get it when I was at home. And she was like, it's no book called Sophie's World. I think you're talking about Sophie's Choice. And like, she was busy. And so she hadn't read the book. And she was just like, I think you talk about this here. I was not talking about that, but I found the book to be unsettling and to expose me to a world. Like, I thought that like my suffering was the height of suffering that you could go through. And I read that book and it really changed a lot of what I thought about like what it meant to suffer, but what it meant to have to live with the choices you made. Now that was happenstance, but I would give that book to a kid. And the thing is, I think the first way you answer that question is, what book deeply moved me? What book made me see the world in a different way? Because sometimes what we get out of a book is not what's in the book, but the passion that's conveyed by the person who gives us that book. So that's just one rule I would say is always give people the books that you love. Don't give people the books that you imagine will like talk to them, will teach them something, will give them some sense of what it means to live in the world, because we get that from books, but that's not why we go to books. And so if we start trying to give people books for what they think they'll get out of them, we'll forget that some of the books that we got that out of were the books that were the most enjoyable for reasons that were like adjacent or parallel to that end goal that we actually hold on to years and years later. And then if I was to suggest books, I think, I would think about writers. I would think like Walter Dean Myers is just a really excellent writer. Younger writers, I would think Jason Reynolds is excellent. It's a book called Insurrections by Rion Scott. I think a lot about the short story, especially for readers who are developing readers. The short story, I think, is a great vehicle for conveying like what it means to hear a really beautifully crafted book. So I might think about Rion Scott's Insurrections. That first story, Juba, is like fantastic. I don't think it's the first story, but it's a story in there called Juba that's like really, really amazing. And I think young people would get with, because it's about language. And it also has a piece about identity and about how somebody assumes that you're somebody else, but then how you can stigmatize a person because of that assumption. It's a really great short story that I would suggest. And then I would say I got a podcast with Freedom Reads. We're doing a couple of things. Actually, we have a partnership with Break Free Education, and so we might have. It used to be the Million Book Project. Now it's called Freedom Reads. But we likely sent some of you guys books because we send books to detention centers all over the country. We usually send like sets of 10 of the book, and we've sent a lot of books. We've sent Heavy. We've sent a book that I thought was fantastic, even though it was really hard. It's called I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. But you could go to the Break Free Education site. They provide support for juvenile justice, education and juvenile justice detention centers and things like that. And then you can sort of sign up to get some of the books. And we've sent my book out, but we sent a whole array of books. And then what you can also do is go to the freedomreads.org website and you can look at our podcast. And the podcast is really fascinating because you can hear these authors having a conversation. And then one that I would really suggest, and the book that accompanies it, is James McBride. He's just really engaging, kind of funny, kind of fascinating. And then we read Good Little Bird, and that's a book that I would also suggest. But honestly, I'm looking at my bookshelf and I'm just like the books that you love. I think you give people the books that you love, and they will respond.
All right, thank you so much, Duane. Moving right along to our next question coming in the chat. What is something proactive educators can do to help transition kids and to help to not have them to keep committing crime? So what are some proactive educating ways to help students transition in their lives?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's a couple of things that I would flag. I do think books are important because books set the foundation for having conversations that's sort of outside of the context of their life. So you think about a book like Monster by Walter Dean Myers. I think it sets you up, and they came out with a movie, and the movie is they changed the book a bit in the movie. But I think both the book and the movie create like opportunities to have real conversations about like what it means to ruin your life. I mean, that the guy I just talked to, he has a murder case. It was on his call, and he'll tell you how he ruined his life, and we were actually talking about him going out for parole and whether or not I should reach out to the victim because we had been waiting for 6 months to get a response, and the victim's family has a lot to do with what the parole board is saying in a lot of states. And he said, man, he's like, I don't really think I got a right to reach out to them. He was like, look, like I grew up without my dad, and I caused that to happen to somebody else. And and that conversation was one that was both necessary, but that doesn't happen in the lives of a lot of young folks. And I think as an educator, it's really hard to have a conversation without being like overbearing, patronizing, insensitive. But I think one way to have that conversation is through books. And so, I think it's like, again, the short story becomes a great vehicle because the short story is distilling this into a narrow amount of space. And so, for instance, Edward P. Jones has some really good stories about incarceration. And even some things, that's like really interesting. I'm reading this one now. It's called Blacktop Wasteland. And I don't know yet how the book is going to end, but already it's like these really profound questions about like what the guy's a getaway driver and his dad was too, and his dad ends up getting killed and he doesn't even know how his dad got killed. And so the main character has 2 children and he's trying to take care of his kids, and he ends up getting back in the game and you don't know what's going to happen, but part of what's going to happen is not good. And it really becomes the location to have a conversation with folks that they typically don't have. I mean, I went to a high school where my classmates were getting murdered. One of my friends, not my best friend, not a good friend, but a friend of mine got killed the year I got locked up. He got killed by somebody I knew, who I rode the school bus with. I had another friend, my girlfriend back then, her brother got locked up for carjacking, and his friend got killed in an attempted car. It was an attempted carjacking, and his friend got killed. and it was other people got murdered. It was like a little girl who got murdered by some kids who were like in a gang. And this is back when we didn't even have gangs in Maryland. So it was like a fake gang, and they killed this little girl. And it was a lot of like drinking and weed smoking, and there was no conversations in the entire school about any of this. I mean, I had an educator who told me you're going to end up just like Charles. Like she literally, and she thought that she was doing good by speaking death into my life. I got a Yale law degree. You know, I could have been a lot of things even at 16, and this educator thought that the best that she could do was warn me away from prison by telling me that I was going to die, by predicting death. And I think a lot of educators and our sort of, and the fact that we confront immense difficulties on the job every day. If you work in a juvenile detention center, you see more failures than successes. And you imagine that what you say is the one variable that's going to shift somebody's life, but often it's not the case. And when this teacher tells me, I think when she says, "One, you remind me of my son," and she's white, and I'm like, is she fucking crazy? You know, it's like she doesn't even, one, she's white, and she says, "You remind me of my son," which is the first time in life a white person ever said that, right? Two, she said, "The best that I could do for you right now, practically, is to help you get your high school diploma." And in doing that practical thing, it led to a whole lot of other things. So when you say, how can you help somebody desist from crime? I think part of it is not to put that burden on yourself, but the other part of it is to think about the ways in which people aren't having the kind of conversations about the decisions that they're making in life with those who love them. So you can't expect to be having those conversations with them. But what you can do, I think, is to think about the ways in which literature and education can create and set the occasion for having those conversations disconnected from their lives. And I think those conversations and forcing them to write about it, forcing them to think, we think about the essay as like a way to convey information or prove mastery. But what if it was a way to explore what you actually think about a book? What if it was like, thinking about different ways of communicating? I learned to write in prison by writing letters. What if it was a person was having an assignment where they had to write a letter about a book and try to use the letter as the mechanism and the vehicle for where they discussed and engaged with one idea? And Blacktop Wasteland is just this one graph where this man is in bed with his wife, who he's been married to for more than a decade, who's been with him when he was in the game and when he came home shot and bleeding. And she says, yeah, he said something like the squeeze is worth the juice. And she was like, that was stupid then and it's stupid now. But at least back then, we were so desperate and we needed something that it's okay. But right now, do you really, really think that's true right now? You got 2 children and your father's now dead from this. And like that one paragraph could be the occasion to write a whole letter about these issues. And that one letter might do more. It'll give somebody something to think about the next time they're on the edge. So I would say again, I mean, I just double down on my point that I do think literature is a vehicle for having the conversations that are necessary, and that it will always work more than telling somebody something like they'll end up dead. Or like, I had another teacher that he used to call me Smokey. And he was like, "What are you doing? You gonna ruin your life?" And I was like, "Dude, you called me Smokey. You thought it was fun and games 2 weeks ago. Like, what, and so I think that our default should be to lean on our expertise. And as educators, our expertise is education, and we should find the answers in terms of, the ways to uplift the conversations we think are significant in that work that we do.
Thank you again, Duane. We're going to move right along into our next question. Being incarcerated, what challenges did you face with technology not being incorporated into the prison?
I honestly, I think technology is ruining us anyway. And I learned how to write longhand and I learned how to research on my own. The biggest challenges, and I think you could fix this in law school, they would give us research assignments when we first started. They knew that we didn't really know how to do legal research. And so they would give us these closed universe assignments in which they gave us all of the research material that we needed, which allowed us to not feel, allowed us to focus on the technical aspects of learning and do what we were trying to learn. Because I think the biggest constraint in prison, the two, was the inability. Like I said, I learned how to type on a typewriter, and I learned how to type on a typewriter because I was trying to type poems in the law library and not get caught. So like, because if you type in something for personal reasons, you could get sent to the hole. But if everybody else is sending typed up poems to the magazines to get published and yours are handwritten, already you look less professional. And so I learned how to type solely because I wanted to do that. And then it became a great asset when I came home and was in college, because I don't know if you could do college with a kid and a full-time job and not know how to type. But I think the biggest impediment I had was like not having access to a computer. And and that was it. You know, I would argue that another impediment was not having access to like Google and all of the ways in which you could research things online, Wikipedia. But honestly, again, I think educators could provide people with a closed universe of resources and of sources to do like scholarship with. So you know, I would actually argue that in some real way, prison slowed down time for me. And it slowed down time to such a degree that as a student and as somebody was trying to become educated, I spent a whole lot of my time on some of the hard skills. You know, computers, I think, help people to lean away from the hard skills. And so, you know, I had students who would spend more time on Wikipedia than thinking about the book that they actually read. They would spend more time looking for other people's ideas around that book than actually contemplating the thing that was in front of them. So I don't know if technology was a huge barrier. I mean, socially, it was a huge barrier. And I could imagine it being so now. Some of these guys I talk to now reached out to me because they found a way to get a cell phone and found me on Facebook. So like socially it's a barrier, but in terms of education, I don't know. I mean, I think still the greatest form of technology that's ever been invented was the Gutenberg press. And we still have access to what that gives us. So I don't know if I wasn't burdened by the lack of tech at all. Especially because the one thing tech provided for me that I needed to have was the ability to type, and I was able to learn how to do that on a basic typewriter.
All right, transitioning into our next particular question, what is the most challenging thing that you ran into as being a student in corrections?
So I should be honest, like I got my high school diploma at the county jail, which meant that that's the only time I was a student. And I had somebody that, you know, really cared about me and that was able to set me up to do the most that I could possibly do. Post, like when I went to prison, you know, the biggest challenge was that there was no education. There was no Pell Grant, so there were no college courses. And, you know, outside of a GED, there was nothing else for me to get. And so I spent years in which I had to educate myself. So then I would say the biggest challenge was uh, and I was able to overcome this because of how I got my high school diploma. I got my high school diploma by doing independent, personally driven work. But I would say the biggest challenge for people is that sometimes, and we don't think this is necessary outside of prison because people have access to schools and access to their teachers. But a lot of the education that happens in prison is self-directed. And so the biggest challenge actually was how do you get over the bad ideas that people in prison try to teach you? You know, how do you get over the racist ideas? How do you get over the homophobic ideas? How do you get over the belief in an absurd kind of mythology? And that is a struggle because sometimes the people around you are really like you don't know what an essay is. You know, you 16, you 17, even if you 20, 21, 22, you don't know what sociology is. You know, how do you like how do you don't even really know what history is. How do you learn how to discern the quality of the material that you're reading? And how do you learn how to map out a course for yourself so that you understand that this book leads to this book leads to this book? So that was my biggest challenge. And part of the way I got over it was um, sort of reading indiscriminately and then learning that you could get a textbook that would teach you something. You know, I met guys who got textbooks that taught them how to do electronics. I got a textbook that taught me how to do Spanish. I got a textbook that taught me how to write like an English 101 textbook. But I found that in by happenstance, partly because I got this huge catalog called Edward R. Hamilton bookseller that you could buy books from. And that catalog had the categories. So I would say the huge challenge, because even as a GED tutor, we didn't teach people this. You know, we didn't talk to them about the different categories of education from like language arts to math and even the different realms of math. We would talk to them about it like as you go, but not taking a step back and giving people a big global picture. Particularly for like history and for English. Like I had no idea that you could study, you know, American literature from 1800 to 1920, and that's a course. So I would say the biggest impediment was when so much of my education was self-directed. um, that meant that I spent a lot of years like reading Illuminati books. You know, I spent a lot of years reading like the Unseen Hand, and I wish I could get some of that time back because I thought that's what passed for knowledge. So I guess the biggest challenge isn't even a technology piece. The biggest challenge is like, how do you become a discriminating reader in the best way?
All right, and we're going to transition into our last question. In your opinion, what is the best way to communicate with our students? Do you speak to them like they are your personal kids, or do you speak to them in a manner that they are used to?
Well, you got to define a manner that they are used to first, because like that might mean that, you know, like teachers, I mean, like, you know, I was used to educators speaking to me, teachers speaking to me as if I was a problem. You know, if I was a problem to be fixed. They didn't talk to me as if, and then the teacher talked to me as if she expected me to accomplish something. She didn't say anything trite, like you could go to Yale Law School, you know. She was just like, no, you could get a high school diploma. And she articulated realistic goals with me and talked to me about those goals. But it allowed me to begin to do that for myself and to sustain some sense of, and to develop some sense of how you could push forward the realistic expectations and how that pushing forward could get you beyond those expectations to something you can't dream of. But I would say you have to have a mixture of hope. You know, I would say that for children, I think it's nice to talk to children as their children. Like it's nothing that you're going to say that will convince them that they aren't in a horrible situation. But I think it's a lot that you could say that will remind them that they're somebody's kid. And I do think, you know, you hurt somebody, the default is to expect that you can never be cared for again. And I don't care what that hurt is, whether it's a robbery, an assault, whether it's just like you a constant truant and you causing your mother pain. I think the default is to begin to believe in some way that that you can't be a kid anymore. You can't be worthy of somebody just you know, people work these jobs and we go home sometimes and we feel bad. And I think that, you know, I remember some of my students saw me crying one day because I thought one of my students had killed somebody. I thought one of my students got killed. And it turns out that one of my students had killed somebody. And the other kids saw me crying. It was only just twice that they saw me crying for. That time and one time that I got mad at them because they were just afraid to, one, they couldn't forgive somebody who was telling them that they were a bad teacher. And I really got mad at them for that. And but the thing is, in retrospect, I think about it, and I realized that like my whole job was to be hard in front of them. And I was teaching at just a rough public school in DC. And I realized that my whole job was like not to be vulnerable around them either. And part of talking to somebody like that, your kid, is that you actually care about that balance that you walk between being vulnerable in front of your child and trying to help them believe that anything is possible and trying to take care of them. And when you work in corrections, you know, you kind of throw that out the window and you decide that sometimes you decide that your only responsibility is to educate. But if you can't be a full person in front of them, I think it's really hard to educate them. So my suggestion is to do some version of how you talk to them as if they were your child. Even if you tell them, you know, one of the reasons why I'm grateful that one of the reasons why I'm not broken coming. I don't know how you do it. That last part is different. It's like so challenging. It's like, how would you respond if it was your child in prison? And that's why when the woman said, "You remind me of my son," like it was such a powerful moment for me because it made me realize that like she could see her kid and me and be broken by it, you know, and be hurt by it. And I think a lot of what students feel, a lot of what I felt when I was locked up, is that nobody imagined that somebody they love could be me. And feeling that way just distant me from so many people who were around me. And it was just it became another thing I had to figure out how to get over. But part of me getting over it was meeting a few people who didn't feel that way. So I would say that.
And we are right at 10 o'clock, Duane. So thank you so much for facilitating and sharing all of your ideas today. It has been a true treasure for all of us. And also in the chat, we have included the link to Freedom Reads, and thank you.
Thank you guys, and thank you everybody for coming. I wish I could be in the same room with you, but thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Duane, for sharing your story with us. Folks, we'll take a 5-minute break and we will join back with session 2 at 10:05.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Thank you, Duane.
Thank you, Duane.
Okay, folks, Thelma Hawkins is here with us. We're really excited to have her here for session 2. And Thelma, I'm handing it over to you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Thelma Hawkins. I am the federal branch manager in the Division of Budgets and Financial Management. I know most of you. I wish I was seeing you in person this year again, but hopefully next year. Um, in planning for today's session, I thought about things, the questions that I've received over the past year, and they seem to be some of the same recurring questions. So we're going to go over funding, how funding is received for Subpart 1 and Subpart 2. We'll go over just a little bit about GMAP. Everyone should be familiar with GMAP. However, I do know that there seems to be quite a bit of turnover and transition in positions with staff that work with Title I Part D, the needs assessment, determining the allowable cost, funding matrix, time and effort, and inventory. And those are some of we talked about this last year, but I still had several questions about um, some of the topics, and it seems as though it was primarily due to change in staff. But one question that everyone seems to continue to ask is how, what can I spend my funds on? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So funding, as you know, Title I Part D, there's Subpart 1 and Subpart 2. Subpart 1 is funds, the state agency funds for the facility. So you will either receive your funds for the Department of Corrections or the Department of Juvenile Justice. And then Subpart 2 funding, you will receive those funds directly from KDE. Now for Subpart 1, you do have to, complete that application in GMAP as well as the same for Subpart 2. And one question I have received is, questions about regarding Subpart 1 is the type of reporting and questions about reimbursement. Those questions have to be directed to your contacts with the Department of Corrections and the Department of Juvenile Justice, because those state agencies are the entities which will be reimbursing you for those funds. So unfortunately, I'm unable to answer those questions, but any questions that I do receive, I do forward to those contacts at Department of Questions or the Department of Juvenile Justice. And your funding from Subpart 2, as I said, is received from KDE, and your finance officer requests those funds monthly on the federal cash request. And any questions about Subpart 2, that you would direct those questions to Monica Higgins and Wes Blake. GMAP. Everyone should be familiar with GMAP. It's our online system for creating grant applications. And as most of you, I'm sure, wear multiple hats in the district. It's most of our federal grants are in GMAP. So it's a system we've been using for the last 7 years. I think maybe Title I Part D has been in GMAP maybe the last 5 years, but it is, we have seemed to like the system because everything is one place. You can go back and look at your past year's applications, and you don't have to wonder where that paper version is. And any comments that the consultants may have made regarding your application, it's all tracked in one place for you to be able to go back and review from year to year to see what you did the previous year, look at your budget to see how things were budgeted from the previous year. Also, one question that I do keep getting from both the finance officers and the program person in the district is regarding making budget amendments in GMAP. Like, how often should you do that? And we know that it will not be perfect, but we have always said, we do not want you to make a change in GMAP at the same time you make a change in Munis, because that happens weekly. What you need to do is just kind of review your budgets, maybe. Some districts do it semi-annually, but we want your budget to be relatively close to how you're spending. So if you may have if you may have funds budgeted, and I always use personnel, if you have funds budgeted in personnel, and let's say you have personnel budgeted at 5,000, and you make a change and it goes, your budget is now 20,000. That's a significant change. You would need to go into GMAP and make a change. But, if you're talking within a couple of $1,000s range, that would be relatively close. But we do not want you to make a change in GMAP every time you make a change in Munis, because that would be multiple revisions, and we don't want that. So, and then some districts tend to wait until the end of the year and see what was spent in Munis, and then go in GMAP and update that budget. But as long as your budget is relatively close to what you have in Munis, that's okay. But once again, it does not have to be perfect. We just want to make sure that budget is relatively close. Okay, the needs assessment. So with your needs assessment, this is your planning tool you should use at the beginning of every year to determine what your plan is for the upcoming year. And your needs assessment does have to be uploaded in GMAP. So I always consider this is your first plan for your budget, because with your needs assessment, you're going to determine what the needs are for the upcoming year for your students, for your for your staff working with the students. And there are many forms of resources that you will need to gather your data. You may use assessment data or attendance data or surveys that maybe have been conducted throughout the year. And so once you determine what your needs are and what your plan is for the upcoming year, then you can start to plan your budget. So your costs should align with what was identified in your needs assessment. So if you decided that you are going to plan training for Title I Part D staff, so you look at the cost. What type of training do you want your staff to have? Is it attending conferences, or it may be an online training? So you look at, if it's a conference, what type of conferences, what's the cost of the registration? So that's how you determine your budget, what you can spend on. But it starts with the needs assessment in your plan. If there is resources or materials that are needed for the students. So you look at what resources, what materials and supplies you need for those students, and you do a cost estimate. Whether it's you Google, or if your district has some kind of resource catalog that you plan on using to purchase those materials for students. So you base those costs in your budget. You base those costs and put those in your budget. But remember, all activities and expenditures must tie back to what is in your needs assessment. What do you plan to use, or what activities you plan for the upcoming year for the Title I Part D program, whether it's Subpart 1 or Subpart 2, but it begins with the needs assessment. So once you have determined, what those costs are for activities in your needs assessment, you have to make sure all of your costs are reasonable, necessary, allocable, and documented. So reasonable, you make sure all costs are reasonable in nature. Just because you have the funds available, it doesn't mean that that cost is reasonable. For instance, if you want to send staff to a conference, and I'm gonna pick on California, the conference is in California, travel and um, hotel costs, the costs are relatively expensive. So just because you may have the funds to send 3 or 4 staff doesn't necessarily mean you should, because is that reasonable? Look at what the cost of registration is. Look at the cost of what the hotel costs and meals and travel expenses revolved around that. Yeah, even though you may have the funds in the budget, just see, is it reasonable to send 3 or 4 people if airfare is $600-700 a person, or the cost of the registration might be $700-800 a person. So you have to really think about the reasonableness of the expenditure. Also, I'm trying to think of another item. Chromebooks are relatively inexpensive now, but just think about the reasonableness. Just because you have the funds in a budget doesn't necessarily mean you need to that you should make the purchase. Which moves us to necessary. Is the item or the expenditure, the cost, the training, the PD, is it necessary and essential for carrying out activities under Title I Part D? So, you have to make sure you have the funds, and then is it necessary? Is it necessary to provide the services to students? Is it necessary for our staff to attend a particular training? So you think about that when you are determining your costs. And allocable, is the cost um, um, allowable under Title I Part D? Because you have to make sure that cost is allowable under Title I D to carry out that service, which means in turn you can charge that to the grant. There are many cases when districts may proportionally pay for an item. So the cost could be split between maybe Title I or Title II or some other federal program, or some non-federal program, maybe some state-funded program, or even with local funds. So for instance, a professional development, if there's a district-wide professional development and they're asking, they're looking to see, the district maybe say, oh, can Title I Part D pay a portion of the cost for the training? So you would look at what's the portion of your Title I, if it's for teachers. So what's the portion of your Title I Part D staff that will be, which will be attending the training? And so you look at that and you would pay the proportional cost for those staff. So that's a way to determine that. And also document. You want to make sure you always keep your documentation on file for any expenditures, because for monitoring purposes, you will need that documentation. If your district or facility is monitored, you want to have the documentation that shows this was a Title I Part D purchase. Here's the documentation that shows that where they could be, if it was a training, attendance logs, sign-in sheets, just to show that the Title I-D staff did attend a training or professional development, which was paid with Title I Part D funds. Okay, allowable costs and budgeted costs. I have received questions about this because I always say, even though a cost is allowable, it could potentially be unallowable if it's not budgeted. So you have to make sure that your costs are included in your budget. I had one district that had a question about, a consultant had contacted them. This is not regarding Title I Part D, but another grant, they said, well, it's allowable. And I was like, yes, but you didn't have it in your budget. So this goes back to documenting. So just because costs are allowable under that program, you need to make sure that it's also budgeted. And so I do know that plans change, activities change, your needs change throughout the year. You just make sure that it's well documented. And the guidance, the federal guidance, which revolves around cost allowability, is the Uniform Grants Guidance. And then there's the Education Department General Administrative Regulations, and then the Title I Part D statute. At the end, I think Monica and Wes will send this PowerPoint out, and those are hyperlinks to all of those statutory requirements.
Yes, Thelma, and we definitely will send the PowerPoint out to all of the participants.
Okay. So back to, what can I spend my Title I Part D funds on? So you think about, the first question is, can I purchase? And then you think about, can I purchase online curriculum? And so yes, that would be an allowable expense. And the need, was the need identified in your needs assessment? You have to think about that. All of this ties together. Can I purchase online curriculum? So yes. And then the need, was the need identified in your needs assessment? And then if it was, and we're going to just go along with assuming that it was, well, then once you are developing your plan and budget in GMAP, you need to make sure you include that in your budget under the appropriate allowable munis object code in GMAP. And also, if for some reason it was not included in your needs assessment, you would need to update your needs assessment. And when I would say update your needs assessment, if you had no mention of using an online curriculum or something of that sort, well, then if it was totally eliminated, if it was something you thought about after the fact, I am thinking you would need to revise that needs assessment. Monica, Wes, do you want to chime in? What are the how often can their needs assessment be revised? This is a living document. They update it and submit that revision in GMAP whenever they make changes.
Yes, that brings up a great point. Their needs assessment or their budget or anything pertaining to their application, it is a living document and it can be revised anytime as needed. It will have to go back through the proper chain of command, where it will start at their level and then it will go to their finance officer from their district level, and then it will go to, for subpart 1, it will either go to Lachina or Shannon, and then it will eventually come to me. But yes, you are exactly right, Thelma. It is a living document, and they can make changes at any time.
Okay. And so when you're making purchases, you need to always remember that federal funds are supplementary in nature. So you are providing services above and beyond what what the district should already be providing for these particular students. So just remember, federal funds are always supplementary in nature to provide services above and beyond what is required. Okay, and then these are just some examples of what Title I Part D funds can be spent on. I'm going to focus on the items that are not allowed because we get these questions all the time, especially at the end of the year, you know, birthday parties, anything that is not directly related to education or transition is not allowed. Birthday parties, gift cards, entertainment, non-instructional field trips, student incentives that are fiscal in nature. Sometimes they want to, we've asked questions, could they pay students, you know, give them a stipend or some kind of reward? Those things, those type of expenditures are not allowed. And we typically get these questions toward the end of the school year. And I understand that, you know, you want to reward the students in some form or fashion, but instructional field trips are are allowed, and you may have to have prior approval for that. One thing that always comes to mind at the end of the year, field trips to Kings Island. We evidently Kings Island has some kind of STEM um, portion at the park, and you know, we've asked, can we take them, take the kids and use whatever grant funds to pay? And so my question is, how much time will actually, you're going to be there all day, how much time will actually be spent at that STEM portion of the park? And so that usually answers they usually answer that question themselves, because we know that, or you know, a small portion of time will be spent at that park. So you probably just need to find other fund sources. But you know, Mammoth Cave, I know field trips for, not for Title I Part D, but other grants have allowed, you know, field trips to Mammoth Cave. They've implemented, you know, something as part of their social studies and science programs. They have things like that have been allowed, or different types of museums. You know, it's not as, you know, exciting as going to, for some students, it may not be as exciting as going to Kings Island, but you know, the science centers and different museums, those can be exciting, especially, you know, if there's an special exhibit going on. But I think, you know, you just have to put forth the effort to try to make it exciting for them. So allowable, some of the allowables, and you probably are already familiar and using these, budgeting for these, you know, teachers, coordinators, classroom assistants, technology, services for students. And this is just a very small list. It's not the exhausted list, but these were some of the most common allowables that, and looking at the applications that have been budgeted under Title I Part D. The funding matrix. Everyone should be familiar with the funding matrix. It is posted on our website and updated annually each year. In GMAP, we've made it easy for you because on the budget page, the only codes that have been that are in GMAP are the only codes that are the allowable codes which for which you can budget in. So we made it pretty easy in GMAP. And when determining, you know, what's the best code to use, I always refer program staff, the district program staff, to talk with your finance officer because every district budgets and codes things differently, you know, to meet their needs. So always work with your finance officer, and you should always have a good relationship with your finance officer in working on your budgets and for the upcoming year, and just throughout the year, just have periodic checks to talk about the budget and the planning and you know, where you are with your funding for your program. Okay, and then just to recap, so what can I use my funds to budget? What can I use my funds for? And it is one, it starts with the need assessment to identify, you know, your strengths and weaknesses, and what are the needs for the upcoming year. And then you take those needs, whatever's out you've developed on that needs assessment, that's entered into your GMAP plan. And so you put that in the plan, and then you determine what are those allowable activities to carry out the plan for the year. And so you enter that in your budget in GMAP. Monica, are there any questions in the chat?
Yes, there is one particular question that has come into the chat, and it's pertaining, what about inviting guest speakers or having a career day? So the answer to answer this particular question, it is allowable to invite guest speakers into the facilities, and also you can conduct having a career day or college fair, because that also deals with transitioning students to the next area of their lives. So it is allowable, and it is also a part of the transition skills based on the Title I Part D statute.
Okay, and to add to that, you need to make sure you adhere to your district's policy for contracting or rendering services for guest speakers. And also for the facilities, you need to make sure you adhere to your facility policies for rendering those services, because there are times we have had quite times that questions have come through, not for Title I Part D, I'm just thinking about other programs where there's been a conflict, you know, even though it was allowable with the fund source allowed it, you know, the district their district policy may have not. And so KDE does not and will not supersede whatever that district policy is. You know, I'm sorry, you have to follow whatever your district policy is for rendering those services, or even for travel. You just whatever, even though the grant may allow it, you always have to keep in mind you need to adhere to whatever your district policy is, even if it's paying stipends, travel, professional development. You have to adhere to your district policies, even though the grant may allow it. Okay. Time and effort. I still get a lot of questions on this because for whatever reason, districts think it only applies to Title I. Time and effort applies to every federal fund source, regardless if you receive funds directly from a federal agency, or if you receive it from another state agency. If you have salary and a personnel charges that are funded by a federal grant, you must maintain time and effort. And so with time and effort, there are two types of certification. There's the semi-annual certification, and then there's the monthly certification. So if an employee is funded 100% with federal funds, they would only need to complete the time and effort certification twice a year. If an employee is funded with multiple fund sources, well, then that monthly certification should be completed monthly and signed off by the employee and supervisor. Now, you can use the Title I provides a sample time and effort log. You may use that same log for any of your federal programs, but just keep in mind the time and effort must be kept for any staff paid with federal funds, regardless of you received them directly from the federal government, KDE, another state agency. Yes, it applies to every federal fund source, and not just Title I. So that question keeps coming up. If any of you work with the recently received CARES Act funds, because we had questions about that. Do we have to keep time and effort for our ESSER funds? Yes, because it is, a federal, it's federal funds, and if you're paying salary out of those federal funds, if those salaries are directly charged to any of those fund sources, you must maintain time and effort, your time and effort logs for those staff for auditing and monitoring purposes. Okay.
And
Inventory.
also,
Oh, go ahead.
Thelma, sorry to cut you off
No,
again.
you're fine.
We've also had several questions to come into the chat.
Okay.
All right, so the first question is, how would this be coded, going back to Heather Moss's question about the guest speakers? So they are allowable, and she wants to know, how will this be coded, and does it need to also be included in the needs assessment? And so, yes, the guest speakers will need to be included in the needs assessment, and Heather, offline, both me and you can work together to find the specific code to code those guest speakers correctly using the funding matrix.
Yes, and let me, Monica, and to add that, usually if it is, if the guest speaker is a school district employee, it usually falls in one of those 0300 codes, because there's a code for educational consultant, workshop consultants. They have different types of consultants, and it typically falls in one of those codes, but you have to look at the descriptions, and as Monica said, she'll work with you on that, but it usually falls in some of those 0300, that 0300 series. Okay.
All right, and moving right along to our next question from Jeremy King. He wanted to know, when can we expect to find or have the next funding allocations to be released? And so particularly Jeremy, and to the rest of the audience, the state agency directors for Department of Correction as well as Department of Juvenile Justice, they are working on preparing the breakdowns for each facility as we speak. So hopefully we will have that information to you soon. And I know that the application for Subpart 2 was recently open on Friday. And so if you have a Subpart 2 institution, you should be able to actually go in and start working on your application now.
Yes, so the FY22 allocations were posted Friday, and the email will be going out in the Commissioner's Monday email well, that usually goes out sometime today. But if you know how to find allocations on our website, just go on the federal grants page. Those allocations are posted, and we loaded those into GMAP this morning. Okay, any more questions, Monica?
Not at the moment, Thelma.
Okay. All right. Inventory. So I'll go over into inventory again because I had questions about this. And I think it was more from a standpoint of districts just wanting to make sure they were doing the right thing with inventory. But the inventory is the process is the same for all. Federal fund sources with you need to make sure you're maintaining an inventory log, and items should be tagged for all purchases. We have used $500 or more. Now we know that in any technology, we know that some Chromebooks may be less than 500, but for insurance purposes, it would be good. You should include those on your inventory log. And most districts already have an inventory log for insurance purposes. So you can use that same log which your district uses. And which your district uses. However, if it's for federal purposes, if it's a purchase made with federal funds, there's some additional information. If there's some additional information, additional information that needs to be added to the inventory log. And you have to have the description of the equipment, the serial number, the funding source, and the federal award, the federal award identification number. For that, you can put like for that, you can use the Munis project number, because we will know like that is unique to Title I Part D and which year it was purchased with. You need to have the date and the cost and where the equipment is located, and the information on the inventory log will be maintained on the log until it's no longer useful and you have disposed of it. And so, but you can use, as I stated previously, you can use the same log that your district, whoever's the inventory person in your district, you might want to just check with them just to make sure that their log has this additional information if it's made with federal dollars. And I will include in the email that Monica and Wes will send out at the end, I will include a copy of a sample of an inventory log. And so you can share with your whoever's the inventory custodial person that handles the inventory for your district. Oh, and so the contacts, the program contacts are Monica and Wes, and any budget or fiscal questions you can send to me. If I do receive a question, and I think it's a mix of programmatic and fiscal, I usually reach out to Monica and Wes so that we can provide a uniform answer to you. Are there any more questions?
I don't currently see any questions coming into the chat right now, but we'll wait a couple of minutes just to see if there are any more additional financial questions.
Okay. Yes, and most of the time and effort, the planning and budgeting and the allowable costs, those are just general guidelines for every federal program, not specific to Title I Part D. So it's like, what can I purchase? And you go back to, what can I purchase for Title I? You can plug in whatever program and just use that same guidance, but everything, all purchases and activities are, that needs assessment, which you put in your plan drives the activities and the costs for whichever grant you're working with. Okay. So, well, Monica, if there are more questions, I'll be on with you all until the end.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Currently, there are still not any more
Okay.
questions coming into the chat. So if you guys do think of a question, please feel free to add it in the chat, as well as what Thelma mentioned, she will be with us at the end. So you still have time.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. All right, folks. Yeah, and if you do have questions, this is Wes chiming in here. If you do have questions that come up, we like Monica and Thelma said, we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. We'll go ahead and take a break. We'll be right back here in this meeting at 11, and we're excited. We've got Jamie Nebbet providing our third and final session, and then that final Q&A. So if you think of questions for Thelma or any of us, we can circle back there, and have a good break. I will see you all here for the third session at 11. And all right, folks, we're ready for our third presenter. And Jamie, if you want to share your camera and your microphone, we'll go ahead and let you get started.
Sounds great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. And let me get your video queued there. All right, Jamie, you're all set up. Your video and PowerPoint are live. You're all set.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Wes and Monica for the opportunity to talk to you today. And we're going to be talking about racial microaggressions in facilities. If it's okay, I'm going to turn my camera off, but I'm still here. It's just easier. I don't want to stare at myself. I want to share that today you're not going to hear anything that you haven't heard before. Hopefully, you'll be pretty familiar with what I'm going to be sharing with you. And again, these are just things that I've either experienced or ran across or researched that might help you in your day to day. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So today, just want to give you kind of a overview what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to introduce the concept of microaggressions. We're going to explore the importance of addressing microaggressions and identify effective ways for doing so. As we get toward the end, I have a couple acronyms that you can use to kind of help you respond to situations. And then we're going to develop new strategies, both for allies trying to disrupt them and for those who may be experiencing them. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So microaggression, I always like to define what it is first. And it is the brief and everyday slights, insults, and indignities and messages sent to people of color by well-intentioned white people who are unaware of the hidden messages being communicated. These could be verbal, for example, you speak good English, behavioral, clutching one's purse more tightly, even something simple as locking doors when you are driving and you see a person of color close by. It could be environmental, and those are symbols like the Confederate flag or using the American Indian mascots. These communications are usually outside the level of the conscious awareness of the perpetrators. I'm sorry, excuse me, being tongue-tied. Often they're automatic and unintentional. It communicates hostile, derogatory, or negative viewpoints, and it perpetuates a worldview of white supremacy and superiority. Sorry, my computer is very sensitive. Bear with me. Okay, and so these are invisible, but are still potentially lethal. I wanted to share, sometimes when I do this presentation, I get the question of what is a macroaggression? So I wanted to also give that definition. And it is a physical assault that is racially motivated violence toward people of color or their property. And it's also verbal assaults like racial slurs online or in person. So that's the difference. Sometimes the term micro, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not as harmful. It's just the term that was created by the researcher. Okay. So implicit bias, stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination are all things that can lead to microaggressions that you can experience on day-to-day basis in your work, even in your home and family, even amongst your friends. Sometimes you might experience a microaggression, but these four things all lead to microaggressions in their own way. So now we're going to go into a couple of different aspects in terms of microaggressions. So the first one is a micro insult. And this is often unconscious, and it's a behavioral or verbal remarks or comments that convey rudeness, insensitivity, and demean a person's racial heritage or identity. And I've got some examples of some of these. So that could look like a student's academic capacity is assumed based on their race. And that could be something I know I'll share what I've committed personally. It could be something that's thinking that just because someone is Asian, that they may be good at math or science. Something as simple as that could be a micro insult. A parent's level of investment in their student success is inferred based on the way they look, how they speak, or where they live. And I know for myself, I was on SBDM for my daughter's elementary school, and people constantly made the comment that African American parents are not involved because they work or they have all these other issues and it keeps them from being involved. And that's not always necessarily true, but again, that's a micro insult. It could also look like a student of color is not given the same opportunities as their white peers. And sometimes we see that even in simple things as making sure that all of our students in the facilities have everything that they need to be equal, whether it's a Chromebook, even as things simple as pencil, paper, pen, those kind of things. We want to make sure that everyone has those, and not having those could be an example of micro insult. It could also look like a Black or brown student is assumed to be dangerous or violent. And that goes into a place. Sometimes when you think about the different um, dress codes that we have, and again, this is Jamie speaking, this is just my personal opinion, the different dress codes we have, if you don't have those in place, you could have students that come in and they could have pants sagging, they could have all these things that would make someone assume that they're dangerous or violent, and hence the reason for the dress code sometimes, I think. Again, this is just my personal opinion. So those are things that are examples of micro insults. So next we're going to go to micro invalidation. And this is also often unconscious, and it's verbal comments or behaviors that exclude, negate, or nullify the psychological thoughts, feelings, or realities of a person of color. And I want to point out that these are microaggressions that make every other microaggression so much more stressful, because you begin to doubt whether or not you experienced a microaggression. And that's what the microinvalidation is. And so an example of that is where we sometimes may say, be respectful, work hard. And that means that you're telling students that if they work hard and be successful, that equals, be successful, be kind, that equals success. And that is not necessarily true, because again, they have barriers that have nothing to do with school. They may have family situations. They may have to take care of their siblings at home. They might have all these other things that they carry when they come into the classroom in the facilities that you can't be in control of. And so just telling them to be respectful and work hard is not always the best way. That's not always going to get them the success that they need. And it says that down at the bottom too. Even when some of them work the hardest and bring the best attitude, they will still be denied equitable opportunities. And so we need to be aware of that as we're working in the facilities with these students. And then we got micro assault. Again, this is the biggest and most explicitly violent type of microaggression. These are obvious, they're deliberate, and they're usually done on purpose. They can be subtle, but most of the time they're not. They usually happen when the perpetrator is anonymous or when they're being supported by peers around them. So for instance, this could look like a African-American specific joke that someone may be telling. They feel comfortable telling it when they have a crowd, which is simple. Someone as simple as like their friend or a colleague. And so you may find that more people are more comfortable committing these micro assaults when they have a crowd around them, because no one's going to call them out about it. But then if you get them one-on-one, they are less likely to do the same kind of joke. So that's what a micro assault is. And it says that there's no guesswork in determining if you've been the victim of a micro assault. And so this is, again, a conscious, and the research says that it's old-fashioned racism. It's by violent verbal or nonverbal attack meant to hurt, oppress, or discriminate the intended victim through name calling, avoiding behavior, or purposeful discriminatory actions. So like jokes or even looks, anything as simple that would make someone else uncomfortable could be considered a micro assault. I'm going to do one more and then I'll take a break to see if there's any questions, because it's a lot of words. I want to make sure that everyone is okay, and if anyone wanted to share with anything in chat. So then we're going to do micro assault. Again, these are examples, specific examples. So for instance, labeling the name calling, and that would be calling students lazy, And this is perpetuated about people of color and can be emphasized in school when a student is lacking investment or not meeting teacher expectations or meeting counselor expectations. They're just not meeting the expectations that you have set forth. And again, our students come in with all kinds of issues, and they may not be lazy. They may just have a lot going on. You just want to be careful and mindful of what you're saying and how that is looking. Also, being discriminatory is another micro assault example, and that is denying parents of color adequate opportunity to be involved in school initiatives and decisions. It's the school's assumption that they know what's best for students instead of parents. And that could look like something as simple as you reach out to non-students of color, their parents, and ask them to be involved, and you make sure that they have all these ways to access you: email, social media, text. And some of the parents of students of color don't have access to that. They may not have a phone, they may not have a computer. You just don't know. You just want to be mindful of that to make sure that you're being inclusive and equitable for everyone and providing the same opportunity for everyone to contact you. Maybe it may be writing, it may be an address, it may be something that's not social media related. So we want to make sure that you're mindful of that. And then we've also got avoidant behavior, and that looks like failing to communicate vital information with parents of color. And so that means like developing specialized interventions or changing of class placement without parental consent. And those specialized interventions could be, for instance, like a after-school reading program that you may or may not talk to the parent about. That's going to affect, if someone has to pick up that child. So if that parent is working, then they won't be able to do that. We've also got avoidant behavior, and that's when you fail to communicate mistakes that have been made when working with a student of color to avoid a parent's disapproval of the school's approach. So you don't talk about the things that have been made with the student of color because you're worried about what the parent may say. And that happens in the facilities too. So I'm going to take just a second and see if there are any questions in the chat. Monica, if you can let me know if anyone is asking anything before we go forward.
Okay, we'll wait a couple of minutes, Jamie.
Sure.
I don't see anything coming in the chat right now, but
okay,
we'll still continue to keep an eye out on that.
Okay, perfect. If something does come in, just go ahead and stop me and I'll be glad to discuss it.
All right, sounds good,
Okay.
and I definitely will.
All right, so we're gonna keep going. So this next slide just talks about what a person goes through when they're experiencing a microaggression. You kind of have a self-doubt, a little bit of a self-doubt, a little bit of, I can't believe that just happened. Did I really hear what I think I hear? Should I say something? Should I report it? Did I interpret it correctly? And then you also go through, well, saying something may make it worse. They'll probably think I'm overreacting, and speaking up is going to hurt more than it helps. So these are the different avenues that someone experiences who has been privy to a microaggression. So you want to always just be mindful that what you say may not be interpreted the correct way. And if you happen to say it, just be open to someone, letting you know that offended me and this is why it offended me. Try to not be so defensive about it because it happens. Sometimes you do it and you don't really think about it. It's unconscious. I'll share an example for myself. I'll never forget. I was in a local grocery store, and I saw a family, and it was two white women, and they had a mixed race baby. And I thought to myself, how could the parent of the mixed race baby allow the white women to raise their child? Again, I didn't know anything about these individuals. I'd never seen them before, but that was my way of committing a microaggression that I should not have committed. And again, it was all in my head, and I didn't say it. But as I thought about it, I thought that was so wrong of me to think anything other than what a happy family, what a beautiful family. So next, we're going to talk about impact, and the impact of when a microaggression has been committed, or you've experienced one, is it begins to erode any trust and credibility that you have with the student or the teacher or the counselor or anyone in the facility. You start to think people don't care about me. People don't care about who I am and what I see and what they see and I bring to the table. And then also, by not leaning into an examining situation, you miss learning opportunities for everyone. So if you don't take the time to evaluate what happened and what it looked like, then you miss the opportunity to keep it from happening again. Okay, so I am a fan of acronyms, and so I like to include a couple of ways of how you can respond to microaggressions, and I like them a lot because there are acronyms. So the first one that we want to talk about is the acronym of action. And so that is, and each one is defined. And so the A stands for asking clarifying questions to assist with understanding intentions. The C means to come from curiosity and not judgment. Again, you just want to learn. You don't want to be judged, and you don't want to judge anyone. And then there's T, which is tell what you observed as problematic in a factual matter. You want to stick to the facts. Try to remove your feelings. There's I, which is impact exploration. So you want to ask for and or state the potential impact of such a statement or action on others. You want to O, which is own your own thoughts and feelings around the impact. If you've committed it, then apologize. Just take accountability, apologize, and try to make sure it doesn't happen again. And then N would be next steps. So what are you going to do now that you know you've committed this microaggression? And then another one is Raven. And so the R stands for redirect the conversation or interaction. The A is for ask probing questions. The V stands for values clarification. The E is for emphasizing your own thoughts. And the N is for next steps. Even after you go through all these steps, you want to, what is the next step? How do you do better? How do we get better? And then the other one is OTFD, which is open the front door. And this one stands for observe, where you describe clearly what you see happening. Think, you want to state what you think about it. Feel, which is express your feelings about what happened. And then desire, which is assert what you would like to happen. So you want to figure out how you feel about it and then talk about how you want to feel about it. Okay, I've got another one. Another one is stop, drop, and roll. And I like this one because we think about that when it comes to fires. If you set yourself on fire, they tell you to stop, drop, and roll. Well, when you've experienced a microaggression, you kind of feel the same way. You feel like there's something burning inside of you that you want to get out or you want to express, and you know how to express it. So this may help. The first one is stopped, and it's consider what you're about to say by applying it to yourself first. So before you tell that joke, or before you say something about that student, before you say something about that colleague, think about how you would feel if it was to you, if it was said to you. The second one of that is drop your defenses. When someone comes to you and tell you they've experienced a microaggression, instead of saying, I can't believe you're saying I'm racist, or you're too sensitive, or that's just a joke, it just fans everything that's already going on. So you want to try to listen to what they say with the understanding that you may have actually offended them. Drop those defenses. It's okay. Sometimes it happens, but just be apologetic about it and talk about it. And then you want to roll with change. So if you're called out for microaggression and you feel embarrassed about something you said, that's evidence of a healthy conscience. The fact that you care that you caused someone else pain is the important part. It's not easy for anyone to make adjustments on how they may have always thought, spoken, or behaved, but being adaptable is good. So you want to roll with that change that comes with opportunity. So I encourage everyone to continue opportunities like this, continue learning what a microaggression is, and continue learning about implicit bias, continue learning about all of these things that make up who we are as a society and a world, and how we can connect and work better together with each other. Okay. So I like this slide because the bottom portion, it says see something, sense something, say something, and do something. These are 4 easy steps that you can always think about as you're working with people of color. These are just I'll provide opportunities so you can identify resources and options available, highlight opportunities for growth, healing, and empowerment, which is kind of what you're doing today, going to these kind of events and just learning more, creating an invitation to everyone to participate, amplifying voices, and inclusive pedagogy. We've got microaffirmations. It's so important it's on here twice. And those are acts of kindness that occur whenever people wish to help others succeed. You want to help process experiences. You want to help people process what they may be feeling if they have been the victim of a microaggression. Victim's not a correct word, but if they've experienced a microaggression. And then if someone tells you they've been targeted because of their identity, you want to believe them. Because again, people come into, when you meet someone, they have all these other things going on other than what you may see. And so you want to be mindful of that. And if they tell you they've been targeted, believe them. Don't make them feel like it didn't happen and it's all in their head. So now we're going to move on to micro messaging. And again, these are I like to provide the definition. So micro messages are those small, subtle, universally understood messages that we send and receive through words, gestures, body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, etc. whenever we interact with others. So this could be something as simple as folding your arms, keeping your arms folded when you're talking with someone. That is a sign of that. That's obviously the person is not comfortable, other than if they're code. But that's the kind of things that microaggression exposes. And so there are 3 important things to know about micro messages. So the first one is that oops, I'm sorry. Please forgive me, you guys. Okay, they can be positive or negative. They are often semi-conscious or unconscious, and they have a greater impact on the performance of underrepresented populations. So students with disabilities, SE, socioeconomic disadvantage, ELL, students of color, those kind of things. You have to remember that micro messaging have those sorry, I'm getting tongue tied, have those the criteria for micro messages. So next we're going to talk about micro messaging. There's 6 elements. Again, I really like this slide because it really breaks it down. If you're a visual person and if you need a little bit more detail, this is a perfect way for it. So first you have verbal. And so that really is just what is said. And then you have paraverbal, and that's how it's said. Nonverbal, and that's body language. Again, it could be keeping hands, arms folded, crossing their legs, sitting up. You can tell when someone's uncomfortable because our body language changes. That's just a natural reaction. And then you got contextual, and that is who or what else is present. Again, when I talked about the microaggression of perhaps telling a joke that's inappropriate in the workplace or with your friends or family, whoever is around you, that negates how people react. So people may be telling that joke just because they have their friends with them and they need that audience. And so you want to be mindful to try not to feed into that audience when they're there. You got omission, and that is what is not said or what is not done. And then you've got praise and criticism, and these are feedback messages, and they could be both positive and negative. They could be telling you you offended me, or they could be saying thank you for exposing me. It could be any of those things. So micro messaging has some key points. So now let's talk about why it matters. So we are all working within the facility, within our realms of what we're doing. And so you have to be mindful of the intent and the impact. So the intent starts with the micro messaging of the facilitator or the teacher or whomever may be in the facility. And then they know their intent, right? I know what I'm trying to say. Whether or not it comes out like that would be the impact. And that impact is what affects student performance. It affects relationships. It affects all those things that we live with day to day. At the bottom, it says impact is more important than intent. And small and seemingly insignificant behaviors may result in unfavorable learning outcomes. So someone expressing something may have the intent, just a simple conversation of, oh, you speak really well, or, your name, I would have not thought that you were a person of color by your name, something like that, something simple. I don't believe the intent is I don't think the intent is negative, but you just have to be mindful that if the intent does not give a positive impact, then maybe you shouldn't say it. Maybe you should think about it a little bit longer just to make sure that it's going to come across how you want it to. Okay, so now we're going to talk about micro iniquities. And these are ways in which individuals are either singled out, overlooked, ignored, or otherwise discounted based on unchangeable characteristics such as race or gender. These are things that they see, that you can see, and I need to fix that because you can change your gender, and your race is a little bit harder. But anyway, I just wanted to make that note that I will make sure to fix that. And so here's some examples of micro iniquities. They are chronically pronounced select student names. My daughter's name is Brittany, and it is spelled Brittany, but she's constantly being called Brittany. And so I encourage her, speak up, let them know that that is not how you say your name. Tolerate calling out answers from some students, but not others. And this could be an example. This would be in the facility. You allow a non-person of color to just scream out and say whatever they want to say, but when a person of color does it, then you want to say something to them. This could also look like discipline boys more severely than girls for the same behavior. Avoiding eye contact with select students, sighing when certain students get the wrong answer, and only using males as examples of scientists or females as examples of nurses. Okay, so now we're going to go to microaffirmations. And I really enjoy these because these are tiny acts of opening doors, opportunities, and gestures of inclusion and caring, and graceful acts of listening and small acknowledgement of another person's value. So these are things that you could do that look as simple as like meet and greet your students at the door or at the facility. Taking the time to get to know the names of your students or the people that are in your facility can go a long way. Being able to have a conversation with someone using their name. Listening whenever students are talking or whenever people in your facility are talking to you. You want to actively listen. Assign females and males to activities based on skill, not gender. If you have a student who wants to, for instance, if you have a female who wants to play football, let them play football. Let them experience everything that we normally associate with males. Celebrate the backgrounds and culture of all students. I know that we have months where we celebrate things like Hispanic Heritage Month, African American Month. You know, if there's not a month created for their culture, create one for them. Something as simple as allowing them to come in and just talk about their customs and what they do and maybe how they celebrate holidays would show that you're interested in what they're doing. And it's a micro affirmation. And then affirming students for their effort and not perceived attributes. And then implement a system for calling on everyone. The example is shuffled index cards. So instead of trying to pick the same one every day, just throw everyone's name on the next card and just each session pick out a different name. You know, Jonathan, you're going to talk today. And then you shuffle it again. Okay, Michael, you're going to talk today. To just get around so that everyone feels welcome and no one feels singled out if you just do it by shuffle index cards or numbers or however you want to do it to get to around everyone have an opportunity to participate. And then ensuring classroom, curriculum, and facilities are culturally responsive is another way for microaffirmations. Okay, so we've talked about microaggression, affirmations, inequities. So now what's next? Now that you've got this knowledge and you have these words to help you be a better colleague, person, worker, friend, whatever, there's some things you can do. And one of them is listen. So listen to the person they're receiving in the microaggression and be empathetic to their feelings. Again, if they tell you they've experienced it, believe them. Don't try to downplay and make them feel like that it didn't just happen. Try not to be defensive or dismiss the person's feelings. It's a big one. You want to make sure that if they come into you, they trust you. So don't nullify that trust. You want to take responsibility for any underlying bias held towards certain groups and take steps to become more educated and understanding. And to me, in my opinion, this looks like, again, just educating yourself on all the cultures that we have in this world, all the things that individuals do, and being aware of that. You want to commit to changing your microaggressive behaviors. You want to recognize that dismissive attitudes are harmful. You want to engage in self-reflection to identify times that you may have been microaggressive in your personal and work life. You want to participate in continuing education activities. And then you want to avoid making assumptions and labeling individuals. Normally, when I do a training like this out, if we were in person, I would have you talk about a microaggression that you've experienced, committed, or witnessed. And those kind of conversations always get really good dialogue because everyone has either experienced, witnessed, or committed a microaggression. And it's a safe space. And so it's opportunity to talk about it and what that looks like and how, as you grow as an individual and you experience things, how those start to change and how you're able to maybe realize beforehand that you're about to commit a microaggression or realize that you've done one and take the opportunity to apologize before someone calls you out for committing it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what next for educators. So you want to make sure that you know what your students bring to the classroom, again, and to the facility. They come in with all kinds of things that we don't know about. And you want to be aware of that and try to keep that in your mind as you're having the conversations with them. Be aware of the microaggressions you're sending, both positive and negative. You want to make a concerted effort to practice microaffirmations and counteract microiniquities. Again, something as simple as learning someone's name and saying it right every time you say it is a big way to have a micro affirmation. You want to work with peers and mentors to identify unintended biases that impact student performance. You want to make your classroom culturally responsive and your facility be diverse in examples that you use in facility to illustrate concepts and ideas. You want to plant micro affirmations in your daily conversations and your daily work tasks and things like that to get in the habit of doing micro affirmations. You want to take advantage of personal development opportunities that address micro messaging. For instance, like today, there's conferences out there. There's all kinds of things that you can research to educate yourself. And then you also want to educate parents in the use of microaggression at home to encourage students through affirmation to believe in their dreams. I think that is a big one. You want to make sure that the guardians are aware of what that looks like and how they can implement those at home, which will make it easier when they get to, if they're more familiar with using them, then it may be easier when they get in the facilities and around you, and they would be able to handle that better. Okay, so then what next for facilities? I think it's important that you foster inclusive and supportive environments, that you have a top-down collaboration and commitment to addressing issues of diversity and inclusion. And when I say top-down, I believe that if you have an administrator and they have you attending all of these diversity and inclusion specific events, if they don't give you money for that, then I think that speaks volume. Again, this is just Jamie talking. If there's no budget to help you navigate this and to do these things, then you have to really question how committed are they. And then there's also offer trainings and opportunities for continuing education and diversity workshops. Put those opportunities out there. I know sometimes when you're required to attend things, you may not get as much out of it as you could if you just do your own research and find some things to attend. You want to be an ally. You want to stand against all forms of bias and discrimination. If you see something, speak up. If you notice something, speak up. If you committed it, speak up. And you want to be constantly vigilant of knowing that each individual brings their own sets of biases and fears to your conversation, to your classroom, to your facility. We all have our own set of things that we bring, and we need to be mindful of that when we're having these conversations. And so I've listed some resources for you, some things that I used for my presentation. I want to point out that the Ohio State Current Institute, they have a great understanding implicit bias and chipping away implicit bias, and they actually have a the name escapes me, forgive me, but there's a implicit bias test that you can take, and I recommend everyone take that because when it does, you go through and they show you the images of people of color and non-people of color and the words, and you go through and you really think, you might think you have it under control, and then you take that test and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I don't quite have it all. I have some biases that I don't even really know about. I have some, which means that you'll be committing microaggressions that you weren't even aware of. So you have to take the time to get to know who you are and the biases that you have and what you bring so that you don't commit microaggressions purposely. It could be, you're not intending to make anyone feel bad or hurt anyone's feelings. So that's all I have today. I hope you've learned something. I hope there's one or two words or activities that you didn't think about that you would be able to go back and use when you're dealing with others.
All right. Are there any additional questions for Jamie? If so, please insert those in the chat. And again, thank you so much, Jamie. Your presentation was wonderful to learn and hear and understand about those microaggressions.
Thank you.
And we'll just wait a couple of minutes to see if we have any questions that come in the chat before we close out today. All right, currently I'm not seeing anything.
Okay.
Would it be all right if I ask a question? This is Wes.
Sure, go right ahead, Wes.
And Jamie, if you could speak to this, or if you're curious, your presentation kind of reminded me of something that Duane was talking about, and actually a question. It came from a question from one of our attendees. But Duane was talking about how a lot of times he said he felt like his teachers spoke to him like, you know, he was someone that was going to cause you know, a behavior problem in class, you know, and so, and then he said that, you know, he kind of talked about the one teacher that really made a difference with him you know, said that he reminded her of her son. How would you, you know, clearly that's a micro affirmation, right? That one teacher kind of treated him like he was family, you know. I was just wondering if you could speak to that. It seems like that story he told kind of encompassed a lot of the things that you talked about, and I was just wondering if you could kind of speak to that. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what did that teacher do, you know, to kind of affirm him, you know, that you know, the one that said that she, you know, that he reminded you know, her of her son. I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit in light of the ideas that you've been talking about, Jamie.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I think what the teacher did is that she was able to look past his behavior, look past the color of his skin, look past anything that he was bringing to the table. She was able to open up and realize, you know, we're all humans, right? We're all human beings. We all have the same emotions. We just may have a different outside. And so she took it upon herself she saw his potential and saw that he needed that, and took it upon herself to bring him in and to say, you're family. And if we had more of that, I think that would help us. I think it would help cut down on some of the things that we experience on a regular basis. Everyone just wants to feel like they belong, right? You just want to feel like you have some place that you can go to, that you belong, someone sees you, they notice you, and to say, hey, you're going to be okay. I got you. Let me help you work through this. And some people need that more than others. And I think that's what that teacher did. She saw that Duane needed someone to just look after him and to be there for him and just help him navigate this path that we call life. And she probably didn't even realize how impactful that was for him. But I think that's just really just making sure people have some place to go to. And even when you talk about your coworkers and your colleagues, you know, you might be that one person that they just need to vent to. That goes a long way to help them navigate the world and the culture that we're in now, right? Everyone just needs someone to say, you're going to be okay. Everything's going to be all right. I can help you with this. I'm here for you. I see you, right? You just want to be seen. I see you. I see who you are outside the color of your skin.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Jamie. And we did have one particular question that came into the chat.
Okay.
One attendee would like to participate in the training where they are able to practice and receive some of those suggestions.
Oh, okay. You can share my contact information, and I can do it with them one-on-one or with their group or what have you. I'll be more than happy to do that. Is that what they're asking, you think, Monica?
Yes, they're asking for your contact information, and I
Oh,
believe
yeah, sure.
Wes has responded back to them.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm more than willing to do. Again, I've done this before, and we can have a conversation and discuss specifically what you would like to be included to make sure that it's beneficial for everyone. But yeah, absolutely, I would love to do that.
Okay, I will definitely make sure. It's Tammy Robertson from Pulaski, so I will definitely send her your contact information.
Okay, perfect. And I'm gonna write her name down too. Okay.
All right. As we transition to a close, Wes and I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our keynote speakers, Duane Betts, and our KDE speakers, Thelma Hawkins and Jamie Nebbet, and also Beth Gravitz from the IT department. In conclusion, in today's training, you have learned about several ways to help motivate students in your institutions from Duane Betts, ideas on what Title I Part D funds can be spent on, and also concerning on how to implement and strategize your needs assessments and gear that also to include your specific needs for your institutions, as well as strategies that you can have to help solve problems if you encounter microaggressions in your facilities. I would like to pose this particular question. Are there any questions still pondering in your mind? Or do you have any questions for our presenters? And if so, please include that in the chat. And I'm currently right now seeing a lot of email addresses coming in for you, Jamie. So I'm just publishing those email addresses. And someone would like to know if you are able to share your PowerPoint presentation for them.
Yes, I will. I have a couple of edits to make, just to make sure that it is ADA compliant for everyone. But yes, I can do that, or I can send it to Monica and Wes and have you guys send it out to the attendee list if you don't mind.
Yes, that will be a great plan. Okay. Are there any questions for Thelma? And if so, please insert that in the chat as well. And also to reflect on today's training, I would like to pose this particular question. How will you implement ideas from today's session into your facility? Take 1 minute to answer this particular question and also include it in the chat. How are you going to implement the ideas from today's session and implement it in your facility? And we still have a lot of email addresses inserting and coming in, but you don't necessarily have to add in your email address. Wes and I will definitely share all of the resources and PowerPoint presentations today. And as a reminder, if you would like to receive Ely credit, please enter your name and email address in the chat. And so we will make sure that you are able to receive your Ely professional development, and we will be sending out additional resources as far as the PowerPoint slides, the survey evaluation information to all of you guys soon. And if you have any additional questions, the chat box is open, so feel free to ask.
And Monica, if I could chime in a bit, one thing I'm kind of curious, I know with working a lot of the Subpart 2 folks over the last year and a half, I know a lot of the facilities do a really good job to get students engaged in reading and with independent reading. I'm just kind of curious if any of you all got any ideas from Duane's talk. Anybody got any ideas of things they might do differently from budgeting from Thelma's, or anyone that got some ideas of things that they want to put in practice from Jamie's? I just want to pose that there to see if you all had any thoughts there before we wrap things up in a few minutes.
All right, Wes, and it looks like we have several people's email addresses are coming in to receive their Ely credit. So yes, if you would like Ely credit, please enter your email address and your name. Are there any additional questions?
I'm not seeing any new ones come in, Monica, at the moment.
All right. Well, again, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for our Title I Part D Pathways to Success training. And again, thank you guys so much.
I did see one new comment there, Monica. It looks like, was that Donna Givens? Donna Givens is talking about setting up a book club based on some of the things that she heard today. That's cool.
That's awesome. And I feel like that would be a great initiative to set up the book club for your students at your institution.
I agree. I like that. And Monica, I see another one. Did you see this new one, Monica?
Yes. Let's see. Currently, Wes, you might need to read it for me.
Yeah, of course, of course. So yeah, it looks like someone is talking about putting into practice, kind of speaking to your question, Monica, about how will folks implement ideas from today's sessions in their facilities. It looks like someone had mentioned there that they want to put into practice continuing to support their program with reading supports and conversations to help professional development for educators.
Yes, and again, that would be an awesome, great initiative to start those reading programs into your facility. And I agree, you can use your Title I Part D funding to help to enhance and implement those reading programs into your institution. So that would be great. Currently, right now on my end, what I see coming into the chat is just email addresses for the Ely credit / professional development.
Monica, I do see a new question from Sarah Vivian. It looks like she's asking, and this is kind of related to you, Jamie. Will there be additional trainings on microaggressions for the classroom teachers? And that's a good question.
Yes, that is a good question. And I do have a session for teachers specifically, and it has a couple more examples of what that looks like in the classroom. And again, if you want to reach out to Monica and Wes and give them your email, I can reach out to you and send you what I have, and we can talk about it if you want. I'm more than willing to share, and I can send it to you, and someone you could do it, or I could do it for you, whatever. But yes, I do have some specific for teachers also.
All right, thank you so much, Jamie.
And just to chime in there, Jamie, thank you for that. What we'll do, a couple folks have asked about this, and Monica, feel free to add anything to this. We'll definitely, like Monica had said, we'll send out Thelma's PowerPoint on budgeting, and we'll send out Jamie's as well and her contact information. So if folks do want to follow up on, a couple of folks were asking about additional training just now, and then someone else was asking about, actually getting to put some of these ideas into practice, which I think is a great idea. We'll send all that information along. If you all are interested, I could try to compile a list of books that Duane had mentioned if you all think that might be helpful. That's something I can definitely do for you all. And we'll also send out a recording of the presentation today as well. Monica, anything you'd add to that?
No, not at the moment. As already alluded to, all of the resources will be sent out, and those attendees that have inserted in their information into the chat box will definitely receive that Ely credit. So just let us know if you have any additional questions for both Wes and I, and we are just thankful that you guys were able to join us today. I believe there was one response that came in. Sarah Vivian said that Jamie, she would love for you to come to her building to implement a professional development for her.
Oh, perfect. I would love to. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I can definitely share her email address with you so that way you both can connect.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Monica, it looks like on my end, it looks like there's just some email addresses for the Ely and the PD credit. I don't see any new questions for you coming in at the moment.
All right. And again, thank you guys. And if you want to log off or close, because we will definitely be sending out all of the resources, evaluations, PowerPoint. We will send that information out to everyone. So again, thank you so much for attending our 4th annual Title I Part D Pathways to Success training.